Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the absolute oldest and, honestly, most explosive concepts in all of human history, the idea of a supernatural creator. But we're doing it a bit differently. We're going on a fiercely impartial journey to analyze how philosophers actually argue about this stuff. We're putting on our philosophy and reason hats and looking strictly at the mechanics of the arguments themselves. No taking sides, just diving directly into the ideas.
Okay, let's dive into this. Is the universe a random accident, or is it a carefully designed machine? I mean, it's the ultimate philosophical puzzle, right? It's a question that bridges the vast, completely unfathomable expanse of cosmology and physics, all the way down to the intimate, quiet depths of the human mind. How did literally all of this get here, and why does it operate the exact way it does?
To unpack this whole shebang, we have a clear agenda. We're looking at design in the universe, the fine-tuning argument, objections to fine-tuning, the mystery of consciousness, and finally, debating the mind's origins. We'll start at the absolute outer edges of the cosmos and travel all the way inward to the depths of the human brain.
Starting with Section 1, Design in the Universe.
And this brilliantly illustrates the historical roots of what's called the teleological argument. Think about the most famous version of this, from the 18th century theologian William Paley. He used a super relatable analogy. Imagine you're walking along, and you find a watch on the ground. You instantly recognize its order, its complexity, and how all those tiny gears cooperate, right? Even if you literally never saw it being made, you know an intelligent engineer designed it to keep time. Well, Paley argued that the natural world is vastly more complex and unified than a simple watch. Therefore, he concluded, the world probably has a much greater cosmic engineer.
But as you might expect, this analogy met some really fierce resistance. Scottish philosopher David Hume pointed out what he saw as a critical flaw. He basically said, look, we have empirical experience of humans making watches, but absolutely nobody has ever witnessed a god making a universe. For skeptics, comparing human-made devices to the origin of the cosmos breaks the analogy completely.
Which leads us perfectly to Section 2, the fine-tuning argument. Because of critiques like Hume's, the debate actually shifted away from biology and into modern astrophysics. So the crucial point is that our universe exhibits this delicate, razor-thin balance. We're talking about specific laws, like the strong and weak nuclear forces, or the exact expansion rate of the Big Bang. If the universe had expanded even a microscopic fraction of a degree faster, matter would be way too diffuse, and life-supporting stars could literally never have formed. It is absolutely astounding when you think about it. The physical laws of nature are balanced perfectly on a razor's edge, seemingly perfectly suited to allow life to exist. To make sense of this, philosopher Robin Collins brings up the principle of confirmation. The basic idea here is that if you have two competing theories, an observation counts as evidence for whichever theory makes that observation most probable. Collins argues that this razor-edge fine-tuning is vanishingly improbable if we just chalk it up to pure chance, but it's highly probable if a creator actually intended for life to exist. So, in his view, the fine-tuning heavily tilts the scales toward design.
That brings us to Section 3, Objections to Fine-Tuning. Just like Paley's watch met David Hume, this modern fine-tuning argument meets its own rigorous objections.
The most prominent pushback from atheists and scientific naturalists is the multiverse hypothesis. I mean, what if our universe just isn't the only one? If there's some deep metaphysical mechanism out there just belching out infinite universes with infinite variations of physical laws, well, eventually one of them is bound to permit life purely by mathematical inevitability. It's like that famous analogy. If you have chimpanzees randomly typing on typewriters for eons of time, eventually they'll produce a Shakespearean play. Under this view, there's no miracle at all. We just happen to live in the lucky, life-permitting universe. Now, what's really interesting here is Collins' sharp rebuttal to that. He labels the multiverse an ad hoc hypothesis. In science, an ad hoc hypothesis is something you invent purely to guard your theory from objections without any independent way to actually test it. Collins points out that we have absolutely zero independent scientific evidence for a universe generator. He compares it to a sci-fi trope like H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man. It's fascinating to imagine, sure, but without empirical data, he argues it's a huge unscientific reach to use it to dismiss design. Moving on to Section 4, the mystery of consciousness. So far, we've been looking at the vast physical laws of reality. Now, we're going to shift our narrative inward, from the architecture of the cosmos to the architecture of the internal human mind. To really understand this debate, we have to define two completely opposite frameworks.
On one side, we have mind-body dualism. This is the historic view that you consist of both a physical body and a non-physical spiritual mind or soul. On the exact opposite side, we have physicalism. This is the view that humans are strictly material masses. You're just chemical states and firing neurons, describable solely by physics. Nothing more.
To challenge physicalism, naturalist philosopher Thomas Nagel asked a famously thought-provoking question about 50 years ago. What is it like to be a bat? Now, science can completely describe the physics of a bat's echolocation. But think about it for a second. No amount of third-person scientific data can ever tell us what it actually feels like to experience that echolocation. This points to something called irreducible subjectivity. It's a first-person experience that third-person physical data just can't seem to capture.
Dualists build on this mystery with a concept called intentionality, which is basically the fact that our thoughts are about things outside our physical brains. You can sit in your room and intentionally think about the president in Washington, D.C. How does a lump of gray matter transcend itself to do that? Add to this the corroborated accounts of near-death experiences where consciousness seemingly travels outside a clinically dead body, and dualists argue we're looking at strong evidence for a mind that is entirely distinct from biology.
And finally, Section 5, debating the mind's origins. This brings us to the ultimate dialectical point of this explainer. If the human mind really does possess these non-physical, transcendent features, does that automatically prove the existence of a supernatural, personal creator? Well, the physicalist counterargument is championed by philosophers like Daniel Dennett. Dennett strongly argues that leaping to a supernatural explanation to explain the mind is intellectually lazy. It's prematurely giving up on the entire scientific project just because we don't have all the answers right now. Theists, on the other hand, reply that they aren't giving up at all. They argue that inferring a creator from positive evidence is a rational success, not a scientific failure. Let's see how this builds to our final consideration, Occam's razor. You've probably heard of it. It's the famous principle that the simpler explanation is usually the correct one. Physicists argue that a purely material universe without a God is much simpler. But theists counter that physicalism isn't simpler at all because it completely fails to explain a finely tuned cosmos or a conscious mind. So we leave you with this. When looking at the vastness of space and the profound depths of your own mind, which framework actually offers the simpler, more complete view of existence?